The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop outside the rough-hewn trading post, and Delilah Thornton pressed her hand against the layers of fabric at her waist, feeling the reassuring weight of 300 gold eagles sewn into the hidden pocket of her petticoat. The driver shouted something about a broken axle, his voice competing with the howl of wind that swept down from the Boys Mountains in early September of 1867. She had been traveling for 6 weeks from Philadelphia, carrying the last remnants of her father's estate, and now she found herself stranded in a wilderness so raw and untamed it made her stomach clench with equal parts terror and determination. "Everyone out," the driver barked, already climbing down to assess the damage. "This here's the last trading post before Idaho City. We ain't going nowhere until tomorrow at the earliest." Delilah gathered her burgundy traveling cloak and stepped carefully onto the wooden platform, her boots landing in a thin layer of early autumn dust. 3 other passengers hurried toward the trading post, a squat log building with a sagging porch and windows so grimy she could barely see through them. The surrounding landscape stretched in every direction, with pine forests climbing the mountain slopes and a crystalline creek cutting through the valley floor. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way that bore no resemblance to the manicured parks and cobblestone streets of her former life. She had nowhere else to go. Her uncle in Idaho City had written 6 months ago, offering her a position as a schoolteacher in the growing mining town. After her father's sudden death from a heart condition, and the revelation that his business partner had embezzled nearly everything, she had sold what remained and converted it to gold coins that now pulled at her undergarments with every step. 300 gold eagles represented roughly $6,000, enough to start a new life or become a target for every desperate man between here and California. The interior of the trading post smelled of tobacco, wood smoke, and unwashed bodies. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, and rough tables scattered across the plank floor. Behind a long counter stood a weathered man with suspicious eyes who was already arguing with the other passengers about accommodations. Delilah hung back, taking in the other occupants of the room. 2 miners sat in the corner playing cards, their fingers black with dirt. A woman in a faded calico dress nursed a baby near the fire. And near the far window, his back to the room, sat the largest man Delilah had ever seen. His shoulders were broad as an axe handle, stretching the fabric of a worn buckskin shirt that had seen better days. Dark hair fell past his collar, and even seated, she could tell he stood well over 6 feet. His hands, wrapped around a tin cup, were scarred and capable-looking, the hands of a man who had fought the wilderness and won. Something about his stillness drew her attention, the way a wolf might sit motionless before deciding whether to approach or disappear into the forest. "You need a room, lady?" The trader's sharp voice pulled her attention back. "Got one left, but it costs $2 for the night." "That seems excessive for such modest accommodations," Delilah said, keeping her voice level despite her exhaustion. "You want to sleep outside with the bears, that's your business. $2 or nothing." She felt the weight of the gold at her waist and knew she could not afford to draw attention by refusing such a sum. "Very well, $2. As she counted out the coins from her reticule, carefully avoiding her hidden fortune, she sensed movement behind her. The large man had risen and now approached the counter with a loose-limbed grace that seemed impossible for someone his size. Up close, he was even more imposing. His face was all hard angles and sharp planes, with a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble. His eyes, when they flickered to her face, were a startling gray like storm clouds over the mountains. "Jake, you got any flour left?" His voice rumbled from deep in his chest, rough as gravel but not unkind. "Might have, Xander. What are you trading?" "Got 6 beaver pelts, prime quality. Winter coats already coming in thick." The trader's eyes lit with avarice. "Let me see them." While the two men negotiated, Delilah found herself studying Xander Hawthorne, though she had not yet learned his name. Everything about him spoke of self-sufficiency and strength. His forearms, visible where he had rolled up his sleeves, were corded with muscle and marked with old scars. A knife hung at his belt in a worn leather sheath, and she noticed the ease with which he moved, like violence would come naturally if needed, but was held in careful check. "You heading up to the high country for winter?" Jake asked, weighing out 20 pounds of flour in a burlap sack. "Thinking on it. Might stay in the lower elevations this year." Xander's gaze drifted to the window, where the mountains rose in serrated peaks against the darkening sky. "Getting tired of my own company." "Hell, Xander, you've been living alone up there for what, 5 years now? About time you came back to civilization." "This is not civilization. This is barely a way station." But there was no heat in his words, just statement of fact. Delilah felt his attention shift to her, and she found herself meeting those gray eyes with more boldness than was strictly proper. Something flickered in his expression, a brief spark of interest before his face returned to careful neutrality. "You with the stage?" he asked her directly. "Yes, we have broken down, it seems." "That driver's a fool for pushing so hard this late in the season. Could get snow up here any day now." He tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You running to something or from something?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. "I beg your pardon." Most women traveling alone out here fall into one of those 2 categories. "Just wondering which one you are." "That is hardly your concern, Mr. Hawthorne, Xander Hawthorne." He did not offer his hand, perhaps recognizing that she might not take it. "And you are right, it is not my concern, just making conversation to pass the time." "Miss Delilah Thornton," she said, then wondered why she had given him her full name when she had intended to remain anonymous. Something about him commanded honesty, perhaps the way he looked at her without the usual calculation she had seen in men's eyes since beginning this journey. "Thornton. You got family in Idaho City?" "That is where the stage is headed. My uncle. He has offered me a position as a schoolteacher." Xander's eyebrows rose slightly. "A schoolteacher, we could use one." "Most of the children up there are running wild while their fathers chase gold and their mothers try to keep everyone fed." "You know Idaho City well?" "Well enough. Lived there for a time before I moved to the mountains. It has grown since the gold rush started. Probably 3,000 people now, maybe more." He picked up his sack of flour with one hand, the weight that would have required 2 hands for most men seemingly nothing to him. "If you are heading there, watch yourself. Mining towns attract all kinds and not all of them friendly." There was something protective in his tone that surprised her, as if he had known her longer than 5 minutes. Before she could respond, Jake called out that her room was ready. It was more of a closet than a room, with a narrow cot and a single window that looked out over the creek. But after weeks of traveling, even this seemed like luxury. She carefully locked the door, checked the window latch twice, and only then allowed herself to sink onto the cot and press her hands against her face. The gold felt heavier than ever, a burden she could not share with anyone. Her father had made her promise on his deathbed to start fresh, to use the money wisely, to never let anyone take advantage of her the way his partner had taken advantage of him. She had sewn the coins herself into the reinforced petticoat pocket, a hiding place she prayed would hold until she reached her uncle's house in Idaho City. But every day of travel had worn on her nerves, and the constant fear of discovery made her jump at shadows. Through the thin walls, she could hear the rumble of male voices in the main room. One of them was Xander Hawthorne's distinctive bass. She found herself wondering about him, this mountain man who seemed to exist on the edges of civilization. What drove a man to choose solitude over community? What had happened to make him prefer the company of trees and wild animals to other human beings? She slept poorly that night, disturbed by unfamiliar sounds and the knowledge that only a thin door separated her from strangers. Twice she woke convinced that someone was trying to open her door, but each time it proved to be nothing more than the wind rattling the frame. When dawn finally broke, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold, she dressed quickly and repacked her single carpet bag, checking to ensure the gold remained secure and hidden. The main room was already busy when she emerged. The trader's wife, a thin woman with kind eyes, had prepared breakfast of fried cornmeal mush and weak coffee. Delilah ate standing at the counter, not wanting to presume a seat at one of the tables. The other stage passengers were already complaining loudly about the delay, and the driver was trying to explain that the axle needed a full replacement before they could continue. "Might be 2 days," he said grimly. "Got to fashion a new piece from scratch. 2 days. I have business in Idaho City that cannot wait." One of the men, a merchant from his dress, slammed his hand on the table. "Then walk. It is only about 20 miles through mountain terrain with bears, cougars, and possibly early snow. Your choice." Delilah felt her stomach drop. 2 more days here, with the weight of the gold dragging at her, with the constant fear of discovery. She could not afford to draw attention by appearing too anxious, but neither could she afford to linger. The door opened, bringing a gust of cold morning air and Xander Hawthorne. He carried a rifle in one hand and a brace of rabbits in the other, apparently having been hunting at dawn. He nodded to the trader's wife, who took the rabbits with a grateful smile. "Fresh meat for the pot, Xander. You are too generous. Got plenty where those came from." He leaned the rifle against the wall and poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove. His eyes found Delilah's across the room, and something in his expression shifted. "You heard about the delay?" "Yes, it is unfortunate." "Unfortunate," the merchant sputtered. "It is a disaster. Some of us have important business to attend to." Xander ignored him, his attention remaining on Delilah. "You in a hurry to get to Idaho City? My uncle is expecting me. He will worry if I do not arrive soon." He studied her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling that he could see right through her carefully constructed composure to the fear beneath. "I am heading that way myself. Was planning to leave this morning. You could ride with me if you like." The offer hung in the air between them. Every ounce of propriety she had been raised with screamed that traveling alone with a strange man through the wilderness was unthinkable. But every practical bone in her body whispered that this might be her best chance to reach safety quickly, and something in Xander Hawthorne's steady gaze made her want to trust him. "I could not impose," she said carefully. "No imposition. I am going anyway, and I have got an extra horse that could use the exercise." He sipped his coffee, waiting for her answer without pressure. "You do not even know me, Mr. Hawthorne. Why would you make such an offer?" "Because you look like you have got something weighing on you heavier than that carpet bag, and because I would not want my sister traveling alone in this country if I had one." His honesty was disarming. "Besides, Idaho City is getting a schoolteacher. Seems worth the trouble to make sure she arrives in one piece." The merchant interrupted before she could respond. "Here now, if you are going to Idaho City, I will pay you $50 to take me as well." Xander's expression went cold. "I did not offer you, but you offered her." "What kind of arrangement is that? The kind where I choose who I travel with, and I choose not to travel with you." Xander turned his back on the sputtering merchant, effectively ending the conversation. To Delilah, he said, "Think on it. I am leaving in an hour regardless." He walked outside, leaving her to grapple with the decision. The trader's wife came up beside her, wiping her hands on her apron. "If you are wondering whether to trust him, you can. Xander Hawthorne is about the most decent man you will find in these parts. Keeps to himself mostly, but he has helped many a person in trouble, never asks for anything in return. You know him well. Well as anyone, I suppose. He has been trading here for 5 years, ever since he came west. Don't know much about his past, but I know his character. You would be safe with him." Delilah wanted to believe her, and more surprisingly, she wanted to say yes. Not just because of the practical benefits, but because something about Xander Hawthorne called to a part of her she had not known existed until yesterday. A part that responded to strength and competence, and the kind of self-sufficiency that came from surviving in the harshest conditions nature could provide. She went back to her room and rechecked the gold sewn into her petticoat. The coins had settled into a pattern that felt almost natural now, distributed around her waist in a way that would hopefully seem like normal layers of fabric and petticoats to a casual observer. She straightened her bonnet, picked up her carpetbag, and went to find Xander Hawthorne. He was in the rough stable behind the trading post, saddling 2 horses with practiced efficiency. One was a rangy buckskin gelding that looked like it could run all day, and the other was a smaller bay mare with intelligent eyes. He glanced up as she approached, but did not stop his work. "I have decided to accept your offer, Mr. Hawthorne, if it still stands." "It stands, and you might as well call me Xander. Mr. Hawthorne makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and working in a bank." He nodded to the bay mare. "That is Rosie. She has a sweet disposition and a good steady gait. You ride. I have ridden, though it has been some time. You will remember. It is like swimming or dancing, comes back to you once you start." He finished cinching the saddle and moved to tie her carpetbag behind it. "This all you have got?" "Yes, I travel light." The lie came easily necessary. If he doubted her, he did not show it. Within minutes, they were ready to depart. Xander helped her mount with a casual strength that made it seem effortless, his hands at her waist strong and sure. She tried not to notice the way her body responded to even that brief contact, the way her pulse jumped when his fingers touched her. The trail to Idaho City wound through pine forests and across open meadows where the grass had already begun to brown with approaching winter. Xander set a steady pace, not too fast but eating up the miles with mechanical precision. He rode slightly ahead, his eyes constantly scanning the surrounding terrain with the wariness of a man who knew danger could come from any direction. For the first hour, they rode in silence. Delilah found herself relaxing despite the circumstances, lulled by the rhythmic movement of the horse and the clean mountain air. The weight of the gold remained constant, but somehow it felt less burdensome with Xander's broad back ahead of her, like she could share the burden without actually revealing it. "You grew up in the East?" Xander asked finally, not turning around. "Philadelphia. My father was a merchant." "Was?" "He passed 6 months ago. Heart failure. I am sorry." The words were simple but felt genuine. "Is that why you are coming west? Fresh start, something like that?" She hesitated, then added, "Everything I knew disappeared when he died. It seemed time for a change." "That takes courage." "Most people cling to the familiar even when it makes them miserable." "What about you, Xander? What brought you to the mountains?" His shoulders tensed slightly, and she wondered if she had overstepped. But after a moment he answered, "The war. I fought for the Union, saw things I would rather forget. When it ended, I could not go back to farming in Ohio like nothing had happened. Needed space and quiet to get my head straight." Did it work? The space and quiet, mostly. Turns out trees are better listeners than most people, and they do not expect you to pretend you are fine when you are not. There was dark humor in his voice. But lately, I have been thinking maybe I have had enough solitude. Man was not meant to live completely alone. Hence your trip to Idaho City. Hence my trip to Idaho City. Thought I might see about building a cabin in the lower elevations, closer to town. Maybe do some hunting and trading more regular like. He glanced back at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that had not been there before. Maybe even find a reason to stay in one place for a while. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat a lunch of dried meat and hard biscuit that Xander produced from his saddlebags. A small creek burbled nearby, and Delilah used the opportunity to splash cold water on her face and neck, feeling the grit of travel wash away. When she returned to where Xander sat beneath a towering pine, he handed her a tin cup of water from his canteen. We are making good time. Should reach Idaho City by late afternoon if the weather holds. The trader mentioned possible snow, could happen any day now. Sky is clear today, though. We should be fine. He leaned back against the tree trunk, his long legs stretched out before him. Tell me about teaching. You trained for it back east. My father believed in education for women. I attended a female academy and studied literature, mathematics, and pedagogy. I have always loved working with children. They will eat you alive at first, Xander said, but there was a smile in his voice. Mining camp children are half feral. You will need to be firm. I can be firm when necessary. I believe you. His gray eyes studied her with that unnerving intensity again. You have got steel in you, Miss Thornton. I saw it yesterday when you stood up to Jake about the room price. Most Eastern ladies would have just paid and never questioned it. I am not most Eastern ladies. No, you are not. The way he said it made warmth spread through her chest. That is good. You will need that steel out here. They remounted and continued through the afternoon. The trail climbed higher, offering views of distant peaks already dusted with snow. Delilah found herself watching Xander as much as the scenery, fascinated by the way he moved in complete harmony with his environment. He pointed out signs of wildlife she would never have noticed, a place where a bear had clawed a tree, tracks where elk had crossed the trail at dawn, the cry of a hawk circling overhead. You love it here, she said, realizing the truth as she spoke it. I do. It is honest. The mountain does not lie to you or pretend to be something it is not. If you respect it, it provides. If you are careless, it kills you. There is something clean about that. It sounds lonely. It has been. But loneliness has its purpose. Makes you figure out who you are when you strip away all the expectations and obligations. He twisted in his saddle to look at her fully. Who are you, Delilah Thornton, when you strip all that away? The question hit deeper than she expected. Who was she? Not her father's daughter anymore. Not the respectable Philadelphia lady she had been trained to be. Not even the desperate woman fleeing a broken life. I am still figuring that out, she admitted. That is the best answer you could have given. His smile transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. Means you are honest at least. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, they crested a final ridge and Idaho City spread below them in a narrow valley. It was larger than Delilah had expected, a sprawling collection of wooden buildings and canvas tents that followed the curve of a creek. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and even from a distance, she could hear the sounds of civilization, hammers ringing, voices calling, the occasional burst of music from a saloon. Welcome to Idaho City, Xander said. The biggest gold rush town in the territory, at least for now. They descended into the town as twilight gathered. The main street was a churned mess of mud and manure, lined with false-fronted buildings proclaiming themselves as saloons, mercantiles, assay offices, and lodging houses. Men in work-stained clothes moved along the wooden boardwalks, and Delilah caught sight of a few women in calico dresses and bonnets. At the far end of town, a white church steeple rose against the darkening sky, incongruous among the rough mining camp architecture. "Where does your uncle live?" Xander asked as they navigated the crowded street. "He gave an address on Washington Street. He runs the assay office." "I know it. Not far." Xander guided them through several turns onto a slightly quieter street where the buildings were more substantial. He stopped in front of a 2-story frame house with a covered porch and actual glass in the windows. "This is it." Delilah's heart hammered as she dismounted. This was the moment she had been traveling toward for 6 weeks, and suddenly she felt unprepared. What if her uncle had changed his mind? What if he took one look at her and decided she was not suitable for teaching? What if he discovered the gold and demanded to manage it for her, the way men always seemed to think they had the right to manage women's affairs? Xander must have sensed her hesitation because he stepped close and spoke quietly. "You are going to be fine. And if for some reason you are not, if your uncle is not what you expected or the situation is bad, you come find me. I will be staying at the boarding house on Main Street for a few days." "Why would you do that? Help me again." He looked at her for a long moment, and something passed between them that had no words. "Because I have got a feeling about you, Delilah Thornton. A feeling that you and I are going to be important to each other. Call it mountain man intuition." Before she could respond, the front door of the house opened and a tall, thin man with spectacles and graying hair stepped out. "Delilah, is that you, Uncle Bernard?" She moved toward him, and he enveloped her in an awkward embrace. "My dear girl, I have been so worried. The stage should have arrived yesterday. I was about to organize a search party." He stepped back, looking her over with concern. "Are you hurt? What happened?" "The stage broke an axle at the trading post. Mr. Hawthorne was kind enough to escort me the rest of the way." Bernard turned his attention to Xander, sizing him up with the careful eye of a man who dealt in accurate measurements. "Xander Hawthorne, I have heard of you. You brought in some gold dust last spring for assay." "That was me." Xander handed Delilah her carpetbag from the horse. "Your niece is safe and sound, Mr. Turner. She is a good rider and good company." "Well, I am in your debt, sir. Please, will you come in for supper? It is the least we can offer after such kindness." Xander glanced at Delilah, a question in his eyes. She found herself nodding, not ready to say goodbye just yet. "I would be glad to." Bernard's home was comfortable if sparse, with simple furniture and few decorations. His housekeeper, an older woman named Mrs. Chen, whose husband worked one of the local claims, prepared a meal of venison stew and fresh bread while Bernard peppered Delilah with questions about her journey and her father's death. She answered carefully, revealing little about the financial circumstances that had driven her west. Xander sat quietly through most of the meal, but she felt his presence like a warm fire on a cold night. When Bernard mentioned the school, Xander spoke up. "The town has been needing a real teacher for a long time. Most of the children can barely read. The last person who tried to start a school gave up after 3 weeks and headed for California." "My niece is made of sterner stuff," Bernard said with pride. "She comes from a family of strong-willed women. Her mother, God rest her soul, ran the household accounts better than most men run their businesses." "I have no doubt," Xander said, and his eyes met Delilah's across the table with a warmth that made her breath catch. After supper, Xander stood to leave. "I should get my horses settled and find my room. Thank you for the meal, Mr. Turner." "The thanks are all mine, Mr. Hawthorne." Bernard shook his hand firmly. Delilah followed Xander to the door, suddenly desperate to keep him from walking out of her life. "Thank you, Xander, for everything. I do not know how I would have managed without your help. You would have managed fine. You are stronger than you think." He settled his hat on his head and looked down at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Remember what I said. If you need anything, anything at all, you can find me. I will be around for a while yet. I will remember." He touched the brim of his hat and stepped off the porch into the night. Delilah watched him lead his horses down the street until the darkness swallowed him, feeling like something precious was walking away from her. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Bernard showed her the small building that would serve as her school, a one-room structure near the church with a wood stove, rough benches, and a slate board on one wall. She spent 2 days cleaning and organizing, acquiring what few books and supplies she could find in the local mercantile. Bernard had already spread word that school would begin the following Monday, and parents started stopping by to introduce themselves and their children. The children ranged from 6 to 15, a motley collection of minors' offspring with names like Jack and Susie and Little Tom. They regarded her with open curiosity and, in some cases, barely concealed suspicion. She could see what Xander had meant about them being half feral. They had the look of young creatures raised without much structure, more familiar with the freedom of the mining camps than the discipline of a classroom. But Delilah had always been good with children, and she set about winning them over with a combination of firmness and genuine interest. She learned their names and their circumstances, which children had mothers and which were being raised by fathers alone, which families were prospering and which were barely scraping by. She established clear rules and fair consequences, and she made learning as engaging as she could with limited resources. Through it all, she thought about Xander Hawthorne more than she should. She found herself looking for him on the street, wondering if he was still in town or if he had already headed back to the mountains. The weight of the gold remained constant at her waist, and she had taken to sleeping in her petticoat for fear of leaving it unguarded. Bernard had been nothing but kind, but she could not bring herself to tell him about her hidden fortune. Not yet. Not until she was certain she could trust him completely. On Thursday afternoon, as she was leaving the school after another day of preparing lessons, she saw a familiar figure leaning against the hitching post outside. Xander had cleaned up considerably, his hair trimmed and his jaw freshly shaved, wearing clean clothes that actually fit his massive frame properly. He looked civilized but no less dangerous, and her heart did an odd little skip when he straightened and smiled at her. "Afternoon, Miss Thornton. Heard you have been busy getting ready for your scholars. Xander, I thought you might have left town already. Not yet. Been conducting some business, talking to folks about opportunities." He fell into step beside her as she started walking toward her uncle's house. "How are you settling in?" "Well enough. My uncle has been very kind and the townspeople seem eager to have a school." "But," he heard the hesitation in her voice. She glanced at him, struck again by how easily he seemed to read her. "No buts. Everything is fine. You are a terrible liar, Delilah. Your face shows every thought that crosses your mind." He touched her elbow lightly, steering her toward a quieter side street. "Something is bothering you. What is it?" They were alone now, away from the main thoroughfare, and Delilah found herself wanting to tell him everything. The weight of carrying the secret had become almost unbearable, but trusting him with the truth meant making herself vulnerable in a way she had sworn never to do again. "I cannot tell you," she said finally. "It is not that I do not trust you, but there are things I must handle myself." Xander studied her for a long moment, and she saw the exact instant when understanding dawned in his eyes. "You are carrying something valuable, something you are afraid someone will take from you." She felt the blood drain from her face. "How did you?" "I have been watching you since we met. The way you move, always careful, always checking your surroundings. The way you keep your hand at your waist when you think no one is looking. The fear in your eyes that does not quite match the situation." His voice was gentle, not accusatory. "I do not need to know what it is or how much. But I want you to know that your secret is safe with me, and if you need help protecting it, all you have to do is ask." Tears pricked at her eyes, sudden and unexpected. When was the last time someone had offered to help without demanding something in return? When had anyone looked at her with such honest concern and no ulterior motive? "Why are you being so kind to me?" The question came out more plaintive than she intended. Xander reached up and cupped her cheek with one calloused hand, the gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "Because when I look at you, I see someone worth being kind to. Someone strong and brave who is carrying a burden she should not have to carry alone. And because I told you before, I have got a feeling about you and me." "I have that feeling too," she whispered. "It frightens me." "Frightens me a bit as well. I have not felt anything for another person in a long time. Was not sure I still could." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, calloused and warm. "But then you stepped off that stage looking like the wind might blow you away, and I knew I was in trouble. We barely know each other. I know enough. I know you are stubborn and proud and smart. I know you do not back down from a challenge. I know you have got secrets and scars and reasons to be afraid, but you keep moving forward anyway." He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "I know that when you laugh, which you have not done yet, but I am determined to make happen, it is going to be the best sound I have ever heard." She did laugh then, a startled burst of genuine amusement that felt like the first real breath she had taken in months. His smile widened into a grin, and suddenly the space between them felt charged with possibility. "There it is," he said softly. "Worth waiting for." Someone called her name, and they both turned to see Bernard walking toward them with a purposeful stride. Xander dropped his hand but did not step away, and Delilah was grateful for the statement of solidarity. "Delilah, I have been looking for you. Mrs. Chen has supper ready." Bernard's eyes flicked to Xander with polite curiosity. "Mr. Hawthorne, good to see you again. Will you join us?" "I appreciate the offer, but I have got business to attend to." Xander tipped his hat to Delilah. "Miss Thornton, always a pleasure." As he walked away, Bernard fell into step beside her. "That mountain man seems quite taken with you." "Uncle Bernard," she protested, feeling her cheeks warm. "I am not blind, my dear. And I am not your father, God rest him. You are a grown woman capable of making your own choices. But I would be remiss if I did not mention that Xander Hawthorne has a reputation." Her stomach sank. "What kind of reputation?" "The good kind, actually. He is known as a man of his word, honest in his dealings and helpful to those in need. But he is also known for being a loner who does not let anyone get close. Several women in town have tried to catch his interest over the years, and he has politely declined everyone." Bernard gave her a significant look. "But I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." That night, Delilah lay in her small room at the back of Bernard's house and stared at the ceiling, thinking about Xander. The gold pressed against her skin beneath the nightgown, and she traced the outline of the coins through the fabric. 300 gold eagles, $6,000. A fortune that could start a new life or destroy everything if the wrong person learned of it. She had been foolish to let Xander figure it out, even if he did not know the details. But somehow, his knowing felt more like sharing a burden than revealing a weakness. For the first time since her father's death, she felt like she was not completely alone in the world. The school opened on Monday morning to a crowd of 23 children and a handful of curious parents. Delilah stood at the front of the room in her best gray dress, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, and introduced herself with more confidence than she felt. The children tested her immediately, as she had known they would. The older boys in particular seemed determined to prove that no Eastern lady could handle a rough mining camp classroom. But Delilah had learned from her time at the female academy that respect had to be earned, not demanded. She met every challenge with calm firmness, never raising her voice but never backing down either. When 12-year-old Johnny Wilson deliberately knocked over the water bucket to disrupt the lesson, she simply handed him a mop and told him he would stay after school to clean properly. When 8-year-old Sarah threw a tantrum about having to read aloud, Delilah sat beside her and quietly helped her sound out the words until she succeeded. By the end of the first week, she had established herself as fair but unshakable, and the children began to settle into the routine of lessons. She discovered that many of them were hungry for knowledge and attention, starved for structure in lives that revolved around their parents' desperate pursuit of gold. She started staying late to help struggling students and arriving early to prepare extra materials for the advanced ones. But through it all, she remained hyper-aware of the gold at her waist and the danger it represented. Idaho City was full of desperate men who would kill for far less than $6,000. She caught minors looking at her with calculation, and more than once, she sensed someone following her on the street only to turn and find empty boardwalk behind her. She saw Xander occasionally, usually from a distance. He had indeed stayed in town, taking a room at the boarding house and apparently conducting some kind of business she did not fully understand. She learned from gossip that he was looking into buying property in the area, maybe starting a hunting and trading operation on a more permanent basis. The news made her heart leap with something that felt dangerously like hope. 2 weeks after school started, he appeared at her classroom just as the last student was leaving. He filled the doorway with his broad shoulders and easy confidence, and several of the children stopped to stare at him with awe. Mountain men were legendary figures in Idaho City, and Xander had clearly achieved mythical status among the young. "Mr. Hawthorne, what brings you here?" Delilah tried to keep her voice professional, aware of small ears still listening. "Thought I would walk you home, if you do not mind the company. Getting dark earlier these days." It was true that the September evenings were closing in fast, but Delilah knew that was not his real reason. She gathered her things and allowed him to escort her out. As soon as they were clear of the school, he spoke quietly. "There is talk in town about you." Her heart sank. "What kind of talk?" "Nothing bad. People are impressed with how you have handled the school, brought the children to order. But there is also speculation. Some folks are wondering how an Eastern lady could afford to travel all this way alone, why you would leave Philadelphia for a mining camp. Questions about whether you might have family money or inheritance." Delilah felt cold despite the warm afternoon sun. "People should mind their own business." Agreed, but they do not, especially in a gold town where everyone is obsessed with who has money and who does not. He guided her down a side street, away from prying eyes. "I am not trying to frighten you, but you need to be careful. There are men here who would cut your throat for $20, let alone what they might imagine you have." "What am I supposed to do? I cannot exactly deposit it in a bank without drawing attention." "Is it that much?" His eyes widened slightly. "Delilah, you have been carrying around a fortune this entire time, walking the streets alone." "I have not had much choice. I do not know who to trust." She looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of greed or calculation and finding none. "Except you." "I trust you, though I probably should not." Xander stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "How much are we talking about here?" She glanced around to ensure they were alone, then whispered, 300 gold eagles, $6,000. He let out a low whistle. Sweet heaven, woman. That is enough to get you killed 10 times over. I know. My father made me promise to keep it safe, to use it to start a new life. I have it sewn into my petticoat because it is the only place I could think to hide it. Xander scrubbed a hand over his face, and she could see him thinking through the problem with the same methodical intelligence he applied to navigating the wilderness. All right. First thing, we need to get that money out of your clothes before someone notices the way you move. I have a safe in my room at the boarding house, left over from the previous tenant who was a gambler. You can store it there temporarily. I cannot ask you to do that. You are not asking. I am offering. And before you argue, think about it logically. No one would think to look for your money in my room, and I can protect it better than you can. He softened his tone. I know this means trusting me with everything, and I know that is hard for you. But Delilah, I swear on my life that I will guard your fortune like it is my own. More, actually. I would die before I let anyone take from you what is rightfully yours. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made something deep inside her crack open. This man, who barely knew her, was offering to risk his own safety to protect hers. It was the kind of gesture her father would have called foolish, and her mother would have called romantic. Delilah thought it was simply the most genuine kindness anyone had ever shown her. Why? She asked again. Why do you care what happens to me? Xander stepped closer, near enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his large frame. Because somewhere between that trading post and this moment, I started falling for you. Because when I imagine my future, you are in it. Because I have spent 5 years not caring about much of anything, and suddenly I care very much about keeping you safe. He reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Because I think you might be falling for me too, and that scares you almost as much as it scares me. It terrifies me, she admitted. I swore I would never depend on anyone again, never let anyone have power over me. I do not want power over you, I want partnership with you. There is a difference. His gray eyes searched hers. Let me help you, Delilah. Not because you are weak, but because everybody needs someone watching their back sometimes. Even the stubborn, strong-willed ones. She made her decision in that moment, based not on logic but on the instinct that had been whispering in her ear since she first saw him in the trading post. All right, we will move the money to your safe, but Xander, if you betray me, it will break something in me that can never be fixed. Then it is fortunate I have no intention of betraying you. He offered his arm like a gentleman, incongruous with his rough mountain man appearance. Come on. Let us go get you free of that burden. They went to Bernard's house first, where Delilah claimed she needed to change clothes after a long day at school. In the privacy of her room, she carefully unpicked the stitches holding the hidden pocket closed and removed the heavy gold coins. They clinked softly as she transferred them to a cloth sack she had kept for this purpose. 300 gold eagles, each one representing freedom and security, and the life her father had wanted for her. She emerged wearing a different dress, the money hidden in her carpet bag beneath a layer of clothing. Xander met her outside and they walked together to the boarding house, 2 blocks away on Main Street. It was a respectable establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Fletcher, and she greeted them with interest when they entered. Mr. Hawthorne, bringing a visitor, how unusual. Miss Thornton is helping me with some business matters, Mrs. Fletcher. We will need privacy for a bit. The widow's eyebrows rose, but she was too well-bred to comment. Of course. You know where your room is. Xander's room was on the 2nd floor, simple but clean with a bed, washstand, and small table. The safe he had mentioned sat in one corner, a heavy iron box with a combination lock. He knelt beside it and spun the dial with practiced ease, and the door swung open to reveal empty interior. "I have been keeping my important papers in here, but there is plenty of room." He stood and stepped back, giving her space. "Go ahead. It is yours to use." Delilah opened her carpetbag and carefully removed the sack of coins. They were heavier than she remembered, and her arms trembled slightly as she placed them inside the safe. All her hopes and fears, all her father's last wishes, secured in an iron box in a mountain man's rented room. It should have felt wrong, but instead it felt like setting down a burden she had carried too long. Xander closed the safe door and spun the dial. "The combination is 231437. Same as my birthday, easy to remember. You are the only other person who knows it." "Thank you." The words felt inadequate for what he had just done. "I do not know how to repay you, do not want repayment, just want to see you smile without that look of fear in your eyes." He reached out and took her hand, his palm rough and warm against hers. "There is something else we should talk about while we are being honest." "What is that?" "This thing between us. I have been trying to be a gentleman about it, not push too hard or too fast. But Delilah, I am not a man who does anything halfway. If we are going to explore what this could be, I need to know you are willing to take that risk." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "I have no experience with this. I was never courted properly in Philadelphia. My father kept me busy with my studies, and after my mother died, I was managing the household. There were men who expressed interest, but none that I wanted to encourage. And me. You want to encourage me." She looked up at him, this mountain man who had somehow become essential to her in a matter of weeks. He stood there with his heart in his eyes, vulnerable in a way she suspected he rarely allowed himself to be. Everything sensible told her to be cautious, to protect herself, to remember that she had sworn to be independent. But her heart, that traitor, was already singing a different song. "Yes," she said simply. "I want to encourage you. I want to see where this leads. I want to stop being afraid of feeling something real." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise over the mountains, bright and warm and full of promise. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her in an embrace that felt like coming home. She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of pine and leather and something uniquely him. "I will court you properly," he murmured against her hair. "Well, as properly as a mountain man knows how. There will probably be more wild game and fewer flowers than you are used to." She laughed against his shirt. "I think I can live with that." They stood like that for a long moment, just holding each other in the fading light from the window. For the first time since her father's death, Delilah felt safe. Not because someone was protecting her, though Xander certainly was, but because she had found someone who wanted to stand beside her rather than in front of her. Someone who saw her strength and admired it rather than trying to diminish it. When they finally pulled apart, Xander walked her back to Bernard's house as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. At her door, he lifted her hand to his lips in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and sincere. "Tomorrow is Sunday. Come riding with me after church. I want to show you something." "What is it?" A surprise. "Trust me," she thought about the gold in his safe, about the way he had never once asked for details or made her feel foolish for carrying such a fortune in her petticoat. She thought about the fierce protectiveness in his eyes and the gentleness in his touch. "I trust you." Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, with frost painting the windows and steam rising from the creek. Delilah attended services at the white church, sitting beside Bernard, while the circuit preacher delivered a sermon about perseverance and faith. She found her attention wandering to thoughts of Xander, wondering if he was the type to attend church, or if his faith found expression in other ways. After the service, She changed into her riding habit, the same burgundy outfit she had worn when traveling from Philadelphia. The fabric hung looser now, no longer weighed down by 300 gold coins, and she moved with a freedom she had almost forgotten. Xander was waiting outside with both horses saddled, and his face lit up when he saw her. "You look beautiful. You are a flatterer. I am honest. There is a difference." He helped her mount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. Ready for an adventure. They rode out of town heading east, following a trail that climbed into the foothills. The aspen trees had begun their autumn transformation, painting the mountainsides in brilliant gold against the dark green of pines. Xander led them higher, through meadows where the grass crunched with frost and past rocky outcroppings where marmots sunned themselves. After an hour, they emerged into a clearing that took Delilah's breath away. A small valley spread below them, sheltered on three sides by gentle slopes and opening to the south for maximum sun. A creek ran through the center, and stands of mature pines provided natural windbreaks. It was beautiful and isolated, close enough to town for convenience but far enough for privacy. "This is it," Xander said, dismounting and helping her down. "This is what I wanted to show you. It is lovely. Is this where you have been hunting sometimes? But I am thinking about something more permanent." He turned to face her, suddenly serious. "I bought this land, 200 acres including this valley and the slopes around it. I am planning to build a cabin here, start my hunting and trading operation proper." "That is wonderful, Xander. I hope you still think so after I tell you the rest." He took both her hands in his. "I am not building just any cabin. I am building one big enough for a family, with a separate room that could be used as a study or sewing room, with a good solid door that locks and windows that let in light. A home, Delilah, not just a shelter." Her heart began to race as she understood what he was saying. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to help me design it. I want you to tell me where the kitchen should go and how big the main room needs to be. I want you to pick out the spot for the garden and decide where we should plant fruit trees." He squeezed her hands gently. "I want to build our home if you will have me. Xander, we have known each other less than a month. I know, and I am not asking you to marry me today. I am asking you to consider the possibility, to let me court you properly while I build this place, and when it is done, if you feel the same way I do, I will ask you then." His gray eyes searched hers. "I know it is fast. I know you value your independence and have no reason to trust promises from men, but I also know that what I feel for you is real, and I think you feel it too." She did. That was the terrifying part. In less than a month, this mountain man had become the center of her world. She thought about him constantly, found herself listening for his voice on the street, felt her day was incomplete without seeing him. It was impractical and illogical and completely at odds with everything she had planned for her independent new life. It was also the most right thing she had ever felt. "I do feel it," she admitted. "You terrify me, Xander Hawthorne, because you make me want things I thought I had given up on. You make me want to believe in partnership and trust and building something together. Then believe in it. Believe in us." He pulled her close, and she went willingly into his embrace. "I will spend every day proving to you that I am worth the risk." They stood in that clearing while the autumn sun warmed their backs and eagles circled overhead, two people who had found each other against impossible odds. Delilah felt the last of her defenses crumbling, and instead of fear, she felt relief. She was tired of being alone, tired of carrying everything by herself. With Xander, she did not have to. Over the following weeks, Delilah's life settled into a new rhythm. She taught school during the day, winning over even the most stubborn students with her combination of patience and firm expectations. In the evenings and on weekends, she spent time with Xander as he began preliminary work on the cabin. She learned that he was meticulous in his planning, laying out every detail before cutting a single log. He consulted her on everything, from the orientation of the building to the size of the windows. They pored over rough sketches drawn in charcoal on butcher paper, debating the merits of different layouts and features. He listened to her opinions with genuine respect, adjusting his plans to incorporate her ideas. When she suggested a covered porch that would catch the morning sun, he immediately added it. When she mentioned wanting a root cellar for winter storage, he designed one into the foundation. Bernard watched their growing relationship with approval, eventually pulling Delilah aside to express his support. "Your father would have liked him, you know. Xander is exactly the kind of man who makes his own way in the world through honest work and strength of character. If you choose to marry him, you will have my blessing." "We are not engaged yet," Delilah protested, though the possibility filled her with warmth. "Not yet, but you will be. Anyone with eyes can see the way that man looks at you and the way you look back. Do not let fear hold you back from happiness, my dear. Life is too short and too uncertain." The first snow came in early October, a light dusting that melted by afternoon but served as warning of the hard winter ahead. Xander worked longer hours on the cabin, determined to get the structure enclosed before the serious weather arrived. Delilah often rode out with picnic lunches to find him stripped to the waist despite the cold, his muscled body gleaming with sweat as he fitted logs and drove pegs. The sight did things to her insides that she was not entirely prepared to acknowledge. He had hired 2 men from town to help with the heavy work, and the cabin began to take shape with impressive speed. The foundation was solid stone, the walls thick logs carefully chinked against drafts. True to his word, he had designed it with a family in mind. The main room was spacious with a massive stone fireplace, and there were 2 smaller rooms off the back, plus a loft accessible by a sturdy ladder. It was far more than a bachelor trapper needed, and everyone who saw it knew exactly what Xander intended. One evening in late October, as they sat on the partially finished porch watching the sunset paint the mountains, Xander spoke quietly. "I have been thinking about that gold of yours." Delilah tensed. They had not discussed it since the day she placed it in his safe. "What about it? You should not keep it in my room indefinitely. It is not secure enough long-term, and if something were to happen to me, you would have trouble getting to it." He turned to face her. "I think you should open an account at the Territorial Bank in Boise. Put most of it there in your name only. Keep maybe $1,000 here in Idaho City for immediate needs. That is a long journey just to open a bank account. I will take you. We can make it a trip, stay a few days, see the city. It is the territorial capital, bigger than Idaho City. You would probably enjoy it." She considered the suggestion. It made practical sense, and Boise was large enough that her transaction would not draw undue attention. The Territorial Bank would be more secure than any local option, and having the money in her name only ensured her continued independence. "You would not want joint access to the account. If we are talking about building a future together." Xander shook his head firmly. "That is your money, Delilah. Your father left it to you for your security and independence. I would never presume to have a claim on it. When we marry, and I do mean when, not if, your property remains your property. I can take care of us just fine with my own earnings." "When we marry," she repeated, testing the words. "You are very confident." "I am very certain. There is a difference." He smiled and pulled her close against his side. "But I can wait until you are equally certain. I am a patient man when it matters." They made the trip to Boise 2 weeks later, traveling by stage coach this time since the route was well established and the weather had held. The territorial capital was indeed impressive compared to Idaho City, with actual paved streets, brick buildings, and all the trappings of civilization. They checked into separate rooms at a respectable hotel, maintaining the proprieties even though Delilah was beginning to chafe against them. At the territorial bank, she met with a serious young man who helped her establish an account in her name. She deposited $4,000, keeping $2,000 in gold coins that Xander helped her hide in various secure locations. It felt strange to hand over so much money to strangers, but the bank came recommended by Bernard, and she had to start trusting someone eventually. That evening, Xander took her to dinner at the finest restaurant Boise had to offer, an establishment with white tablecloths and actual crystal glasses. He looked uncomfortable in his clean shirt and vest, clearly more at home in buckskins and open sky, but he endured it for her sake. Over roast beef and potatoes, they talked about everything and nothing, learning the small details of each other's lives. She told him about her mother's death when she was 15, about taking over the household duties and helping her father with his business, about the female academy where she had discovered her love of teaching and the quiet satisfaction of helping young minds grow, about the devastating blow of discovering her father's partner had stolen their security and the determination that had driven her west. He told her about growing up on an Ohio farm, the youngest of 5 sons, about the war and the things he had seen that still haunted his dreams sometimes, about coming west searching for space to breathe and finding it in the mountains, about the slow process of healing and the loneliness that had become so familiar he almost forgot it was loneliness. "Until you," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Until you stepped off that stage and reminded me what it felt like to want something besides solitude. I am glad I could be that reminder. You are so much more than that. You are the reason I get up in the morning now, the reason I am building a cabin instead of a lean-to, the reason I am thinking about the future instead of just surviving the present." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "You are my reason, Delilah Thornton." That night, lying alone in her hotel room, Delilah admitted to herself that she was completely, irrevocably in love with Xander Hawthorne. It had happened so fast that she had not noticed until it was already complete. He had become essential to her happiness, woven into the fabric of her daily life until she could not imagine it without him. The question was no longer whether she would marry him, but when. They returned to Idaho City as November brought serious cold and the first lasting snow. The cabin was nearly complete, with a roof, doors, and windows all in place. Xander spent several days finishing the interior work, building furniture and shelves, and all the small details that transformed a structure into a home. Delilah helped when she could, contributing curtains she sewed from fabric purchased at the mercantile and suggesting arrangements for the kitchen area. The week before Thanksgiving, Xander came to Bernard's house with a serious expression and asked to speak with her privately. They walked to the small church at the edge of town, where fresh snow made everything look clean and new. "The cabin is finished," he said without preamble. "It is ready to be lived in, which means it is time for me to ask you properly." Her heart began to race. "Xander, let me say this before I lose my nerve." He took both her hands in his, and she could feel him trembling slightly despite his size and strength. "I know we have only known each other for 3 months. I know you came west looking for independence, not a husband. I know you have every reason to be cautious and protect yourself. But Delilah, I love you. I love your stubborn heart and your sharp mind. I love the way you laugh and the way you fight for your students. I love how you are not afraid to argue with me when you think I am wrong. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a simple gold band. "I made this from some of the gold I panned last spring. It is not fancy, but it is real, and it is from me to you. Delilah Thornton, will you marry me? Will you let me be your partner and your protector and the man who gets to wake up beside you every morning? Will you take a chance on this mountain man who loves you more than he knows how to say?" Tears streamed down her face as she looked at him, this massive, gentle man who had changed her entire world. There was no decision to make because the decision had already been made, written in every moment they had spent together and every dream she had allowed herself to imagine. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Xander Hawthorne, I will marry you. I love you too. I think I have loved you since you offered to help me when you had no reason to, since you saw me struggling and decided I was worth protecting. You are worth every risk, and I want to build our life together." He swept her up in his arms, lifting her off her feet as he kissed her with a passion that made her dizzy. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all her love and hope and certainty into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he set her gently back on her feet and slipped the gold band onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made specifically for her hand. "When?" he asked. "I will wait as long as you need, but I am hoping the answer is soon." "Christmas," she said impulsively. "Let us get married on Christmas Day. It seems fitting, starting our new life on a day that celebrates hope and new beginnings. Christmas it is. That gives us 4 weeks to prepare." He grinned like a boy given an unexpected gift. "Fair warning, I am probably going to be impossible to be around until then. I will manage." They announced their engagement that evening at Bernard's house, and he opened a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. Mrs. Chen immediately began planning what kind of wedding she could help organize in 4 weeks, and Bernard offered the use of his home for a wedding breakfast after the ceremony. News spread through Idaho City with the speed that only small-town gossip could achieve. Delilah's students were thrilled, especially the girls who saw romance in everything. The townspeople seemed genuinely happy for them, and several women who barely knew Delilah stopped her on the street to offer congratulations and advice. The next 4 weeks passed in a blur of preparations. Delilah worked with Mrs. Chen to sew a simple but elegant wedding dress in cream-colored wool, practical for a winter ceremony. Xander disappeared for 3 days and returned with a sleigh and matching pair of horses, announcing that they needed proper transportation now that they would be living outside town. Bernard helped Delilah pack her few belongings and seemed genuinely sad to see her go, though he supported the match wholeheartedly. "Your father would have been proud of the woman you have become," he told her the night before the wedding. "And I believe he would have approved of Xander. Anyone can see that man would move mountains for you." The morning of Christmas Day dawned clear and bitterly cold, with fresh snow sparkling like diamonds in the winter sun. Delilah dressed carefully in her new gown, feeling butterflies dance in her stomach. She was about to marry a man she had known for 4 months, about to commit her life to someone who had been a complete stranger less than half a year ago. It should have terrified her, but instead, she felt nothing but joy and certainty. The ceremony took place in the white church, with most of Idaho City in attendance. The circuit preacher had arrived specifically to perform the wedding, and he beamed at them as if personally responsible for their happiness. Delilah walked down the aisle alone, carrying a simple bouquet of pine boughs tied with ribbon, and Xander stood waiting at the altar in his finest clothes, looking both nervous and determined. When she reached his side and saw the love shining in his gray eyes, every doubt vanished. This was right. This was meant to be. They spoke their vows clearly, promising to love and honor and cherish each other through whatever challenges life brought. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xander kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation wiped away tears. The wedding breakfast at Bernard's house was a cheerful, crowded affair with food and music and many toasts to the newlyweds. Delilah's students had formed a singing group to perform several songs, slightly off-key but endearing. Xander accepted congratulations and backslaps from the men with good humor, never once leaving Delilah's side. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, they said their goodbyes and climbed into the sleigh. Xander had already moved Delilah's belongings to the cabin the day before, so they had nothing to carry but themselves. He drove the horses with easy confidence, following the trail through the snowy landscape toward their new home. The cabin looked like something from a fairy tale when they arrived, with smoke curling from the chimney and lamplight glowing warm in the windows. Xander had clearly come out earlier to prepare, starting a fire and lighting lamps to welcome them. He pulled the horses to a stop, then turned to Delilah with sudden solemnity. "I know this is not what you imagined when you came west. A cabin in the mountains instead of a house in town, a mountain man instead of a refined gentleman. But I promise you, Delilah Hawthorne, I will spend every day making sure you never regret choosing me. I could never regret it. You are everything I did not know I needed." She cupped his cold, reddened cheek with one gloved hand. "Take me inside, husband. Show me our home." He lifted her from the sleigh and, to her laughing surprise, carried her across the threshold in the traditional fashion. The interior was warm and welcoming, with the fire crackling merrily and everything arranged with thoughtful care. The furniture he had built was simple but well crafted, and the curtains she had sewn hung at the windows. In the corner stood a small pine tree decorated with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments, a Christmas surprise that made her eyes sting with happy tears. "I wanted our first Christmas to be special," he said, setting her gently on her feet. "Wanted you to know this is not just my cabin anymore. It is ours, our home where we will build our life together." That night, as they lay together in the bed he had built for them, Delilah marveled at how completely her life had changed. 4 months ago, she had been a desperate woman fleeing a broken life with a fortune sewn into her petticoat. Now she was a wife, a teacher, a woman building a future with a partner who valued her strength rather than trying to diminish it. "What are you thinking about?" Xander murmured, pulling her closer against his warm chest. "About how wrong I was. I thought I needed to be independent and alone to be safe. But real safety is not about isolation. It is about finding someone you can trust to stand beside you, not in front of you or behind you, but right beside you. I will always be beside you. Even when we disagree or struggle or face challenges, we face them together." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You and me against the world, Delilah. That is how this works. You and me against the world," she repeated, and finally allowed herself to believe it completely. The winter months that followed were the happiest of Delilah's life. She continued teaching, making the journey to town 3 days a week in the sleigh while Xander hunted and trapped and tended to various business matters. They fell into an easy partnership, dividing chores and decisions without conflict. He never questioned her choices about money or the school, and she respected his expertise about surviving in the wilderness. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small details that make a marriage work. She discovered that he sang quietly when he thought no one was listening, old war songs and folk ballads in a surprisingly good baritone. He learned that she liked to read by the fire in the evenings and would often fall asleep mid-chapter, the book sliding from her hands. They argued occasionally, usually about practical matters like whether they needed more firewood or what supplies to buy in town. But they learned to resolve disagreements through discussion rather than anger. In February, Delilah realized she might be pregnant. She waited another month to be certain before telling Xander, nervous about how he would react. They had not discussed children specifically, though the cabin had clearly been built with future family in mind. She chose a quiet evening after supper when they were sitting together watching the snow fall outside the windows. "I have something to tell you." He turned to her immediately, hearing the seriousness in her tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine. Better than fine, actually." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby, sometime in October, I think." The expression on his face was everything she could have hoped for: wonder, joy, and a touch of terror all mixed together. "A baby, you are sure?" "As sure as I can be." "All the signs are there." He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his sighs. "A baby, our baby. Delilah, you have just made me the happiest man alive." Then he pulled back, sudden panic crossing his features. "Are you supposed to be traveling to town still? Is it safe? Should you be resting more?" She laughed at his concern. "I am pregnant, not ill. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, and most of them worked right up until delivery. I will be fine." But Xander became fiercely protective, insisting on driving her to town himself, instead of letting her take the sleigh alone. He hovered and worried and drove her slightly crazy with his concern, until she finally had to sit him down and explain that she needed him to trust her judgment about her own body. "I am not fragile, Xander. Our baby is safe inside me, and I will tell you if I need to rest more or change my routine. But you have to let me continue living my life, teaching my students, being who I am. You married my stubborn heart, remember. That has not changed just because we are starting a family." He took her words to heart, though she could still see the worry in his eyes when she did anything he considered remotely risky. But he learned to channel his protectiveness into practical support, ensuring she had everything she needed without trying to control her choices. Spring came slowly to the mountains, with the snow retreating inch by stubborn inch. Delilah finished the school year to emotional farewells from her students and promises to return after the baby was born. Several families had moved away as the easy gold played out and mining became harder work. But Idaho City remained vibrant enough to need a teacher. As her pregnancy advanced, Xander threw himself into preparing for the baby. He built a beautiful cradle from smooth pine, rocking gently on curved runners. He repaired and reinforced everything in the cabin that might pose a danger to a curious child. He even carved a set of simple wooden toys, bears and rabbits and horses, polished smooth and safe. "You are nesting," Delilah teased him one evening as he checked the cradle for the 5th time. "I want everything perfect for our child. Want them to know they are loved and welcome from the very first moment. They will know because they will have you as a father. The most devoted, protective, loving father any child could ask for." Summer brought easier travel and visits from Bernard, who was delighted about becoming a great uncle. He arrived bearing gifts and news from town, spending several days at the cabin and marveling at how well they had established themselves. "You have built something special here," he told them as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Not just a home, but a real life. Your father would be so proud, Delilah." "I am proud too," she said, resting her hand on her swollen belly where the baby was currently doing acrobatics. "I came west running from failure, but I found so much more than I ever imagined possible." "You found each other," Bernard said simply. "And that makes all the difference." Xander reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together. She is the bravest person I know. Traveling alone with a fortune hidden in her petticoat, starting over in a wild mining town, trusting a stranger when she had every reason not to. Everything I have, everything I am, exists because she took a chance on me. You made it easy to take that chance, Delilah countered. You saw me struggling and helped without asking for anything in return. You protected my secret and my independence. You built our home with room for my dreams as well as yours. You married me for my stubborn heart, not despite it. They smiled at each other, that private smile of couples who have found their perfect match, and Bernard felt his own heart warm with happiness for them. In early October, just as the aspens began their autumn transformation again, Delilah went into labor. Xander rode to town faster than he had ever moved in his life, returning with the midwife Mrs. Chen had recommended and praying with every breath that both mother and baby would be safe. The labor was long and difficult, stretching through the night and into the next day. Xander paced outside like a caged mountain lion, helpless and terrified in a way that no physical danger had ever made him. Every cry from inside the cabin stabbed through his heart, and he found himself making desperate bargains with God to keep his wife safe. Finally, as the sun climbed toward noon on October 15th, he heard a new sound. The thin, outraged wail of a newborn baby. Moments later, the midwife appeared at the door, smiling and exhausted. You have a daughter, Mr. Hawthorne, a beautiful, healthy girl, and your wife is tired but doing well. Xander did not remember crossing the room, but suddenly he was beside the bed where Delilah lay propped on pillows, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked pale and exhausted but radiantly happy, and when she smiled up at him, he felt his world realign around this new reality. "Meet your daughter," she said softly, holding the baby up so he could see. The infant was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes squeezed shut against the world. She was the most beautiful thing Xander had ever seen. With trembling hands, he reached out and took his daughter, supporting her tiny head the way the midwife had shown him earlier. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I am your father, and I promise you are going to have the best life we can give you. You are so loved already, more than you can possibly know." The baby opened her eyes then, dark gray like his own, and seemed to study his face with serious concentration. In that moment, Xander Hawthorne, mountain man and former soldier, fell completely and irrevocably in love for the second time in his life. "What should we name her?" Delilah asked, watching him with soft eyes. "I was thinking Catherine after my mother, but the choice is yours." "Catherine Hawthorne, I like it, Katie for short." She reached up to touch the baby's tiny hand. "Welcome to the world, Katie. We have been waiting for you." The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Xander proved to be a devoted father, taking on night feedings with bottles of milk from the cow he had traded for specifically for this purpose. He would sit by the fire in the rocking chair he had built, holding Katie against his massive chest while she ate, and Delilah would wake to find them both asleep like that, father and daughter perfectly content in each other's company. Delilah recovered quickly, her body strong from months of mountain living and physical work. By November, she was back to her usual activities, with Katie strapped to her back in a carrier Xander had fashioned from leather and soft cloth. The baby traveled everywhere with them, adapting to the rhythm of their life with remarkable ease. That winter was harder than the previous one, with deep snows and temperatures that dropped far below zero. But the cabin proved well built and comfortable, and they had prepared thoroughly with supplies and firewood. On Christmas Day, their first anniversary, they celebrated with Katie, now 3 months old and already developing a personality. She was a serious baby who watched everything with intense concentration and rarely cried without good reason. "She has your stubborn streak already," Xander said, bouncing Katie gently while Delilah prepared their holiday meal. "Good. She will need it growing up out here. The world is not always kind to women, but a stubborn heart will serve her well. She will have two excellent examples to learn from. Her mother who traveled across the country alone to start a new life, and her father who will teach her that real strength is about protecting those weaker than yourself, not dominating them." Delilah crossed the room and wrapped her arms around both of them, her husband and daughter, her family. "We have built something wonderful here, Xander. Against all odds, we have created exactly the life we needed. We have, and it is just the beginning." The years that followed proved him right. Katie grew into a bright, curious child who loved exploring the wilderness with her father and reading books with her mother. Delilah returned to teaching when Katie was 2, bringing her daughter to school where she became an unofficial assistant and the darling of the older students. 2 years after Katie came another baby, a son they named Samuel after Delilah's father. Sam was Katie's opposite in temperament, sunny and easygoing where she was intense and serious. The two children adored each other, and Xander expanded the cabin to give them more room, adding another bedroom and a larger main area. Xander's hunting and trading business thrived, helped by his reputation for honesty and fair dealing. He hired 2 young men as apprentices, teaching them his craft while maintaining plenty of time for his family. The money was never extravagant, but it was steady and sufficient for their needs. Combined with Delilah's salary from teaching and the interest from her carefully managed bank account in Boise, they lived comfortably without excess. Idaho City evolved around them, some years growing and some years shrinking as gold rushes came and went. But the school remained, and Delilah became known as one of the best teachers in the territory. Students who learned from her went on to success in various fields, and they often credited her with giving them the foundation they needed. Bernard remained a constant presence in their lives until his death when Katie was 8. He left his house and business to Delilah, which they sold to invest the proceeds for the children's future education. His passing was sad but peaceful, and he spent his last days surrounded by the family he had helped create by giving a desperate young woman a chance at a new life. When Katie turned 18, beautiful and fierce like her mother, several young men came calling. She turned them all down politely, announcing that she intended to attend the new normal school in Boise to become a teacher like her mother. Delilah could not have been more proud, and Xander, despite his sadness at seeing his daughter leave the nest, supported her choice completely. Sam, at 16, was showing interest in following his father's profession, though with a mind toward wildlife conservation rather than just hunting. He talked about one day working with the territorial government to establish protected lands, a dream that was just becoming possible as attitudes toward wilderness began to shift. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Xander and Delilah took a rare trip without the children, traveling to the clearing where he had first proposed building their home. The valley had changed some over the years, with their garden now established and fruit trees bearing prolifically. But the essential beauty remained, that sense of peace and rightness that had drawn them from the beginning. "You ever regret it?" Xander asked as they sat together watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and rose. "Marrying a mountain man instead of finding some comfortable life in town?" Delilah laughed and took his hand, their fingers fitting together as perfectly as they had 2 decades earlier. "Not for a single moment. You gave me everything I needed when I needed it most. You saw me struggling with the weight of my secrets and my fears, and instead of taking advantage, you helped me carry that burden. You married me for my stubborn heart and then spent 20 years proving that was exactly what you wanted. It is still what I want. Your stubborn heart, your sharp mind, your endless capacity for love and forgiveness. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing the knuckles one by one. You saved me, Delilah. When I met you, I was half alive, hiding in the mountains from the world. You brought me back, gave me a reason to engage with life again. We saved each other. That is how the best marriages work. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had watched them court and marry and build their life together. 20 years, 2 children, countless challenges overcome and joys celebrated. From desperate strangers to devoted partners, from a fortune hidden in a petticoat to a wealth measured in love and family. What do you think happens next? Xander asked eventually. Katie will be off to school soon, Sam not far behind. We will have the cabin to ourselves again, just like when we started. Then we start the next chapter. Maybe we travel more, see some of the territory beyond Idaho. Maybe we focus on building up the business or starting new projects. Maybe we just enjoy having time to ourselves again after all these years of raising children. She leaned against his solid shoulder, feeling his arm come around her automatically. Whatever it is, we face it together. You and me against the world, just like always. You and me against the world, he agreed, and kissed her as the first stars blazed bright overhead. Years continued to pass, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Katie graduated from normal school and returned to Idaho City to teach alongside her mother for several years before accepting a position in boys. She eventually married a newspaperman who shared her passion for education reform, and they gave Xander and Delilah 3 grandchildren who spent summers at the cabin, learning to fish and track and appreciate the wilderness. Sam did indeed go into wildlife conservation, becoming one of the first territorial rangers when the position was created. He married a botanist he met while surveying lands for potential protection, and they built their home in the mountains not far from his parents, continuing the family tradition of finding peace in the wilderness. Xander aged gracefully into his 60s and 70s, his hair going silver but his body remaining strong from constant physical work. He never fully retired, continuing to hunt and trap on a smaller scale well into his later years. He became something of a legend in the region, the mountain man who had built an empire of family and community rather than gold and territory. Delilah taught until she was 70, finally retiring when her eyes began to fail and reading became difficult. She had taught 3 generations of Idaho City children by then, and her former students included doctors, lawyers, teachers, miners, ranchers, and every other profession imaginable. At her retirement celebration, over 200 people came to honor her, many traveling from distant parts of the territory to thank the woman who had changed their lives. On a crisp September afternoon, when Delilah was 75 and Xander 78, they sat together on the porch of the cabin that had been their home for over 50 years. Their children and grandchildren had departed after a week-long celebration of their anniversary, and the clearing was quiet again except for the sound of the creek and birds calling. 53 years, Delilah said, shaking her head in wonder. When I stepped off that stagecoach in 1867 with gold hidden in my petticoat and fear in my heart, I never imagined this, any of this. Best decision you ever made, trusting that rough mountain man. Xander's voice was still deep and strong, though his breathing came harder these days after a lifetime of mountain air. Best decision I ever made was recognizing that you saw me. Really saw me, not what I could give you or how I could serve your purposes, but who I actually was. My stubborn heart and all. She reached over and took his hand, the gesture automatic after so many decades. You loved me at my most vulnerable and most frightened, and you never once made me regret that vulnerability. You made it easy. You were always so brave, even when you were terrified. Still are. He squeezed her fingers gently. We had a good life, did we not? The best life. Full of love and challenges and triumph and all the things that make a life worth living. She looked at him, this man who had been her partner and companion for over half a century, and felt the same flutter in her chest she had experienced that first day in the trading post. If I had it to do over, I would not change a single thing. Not one thing. Not even the time I accidentally shot holes in your best pot thinking it was a raccoon in the dark, she laughed, the sound bright and clear despite her age. Well, maybe that, but nothing else. They sat together as the sun set one more time over their mountain paradise. Two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something that would last long after they were gone. Their children carried on their values of honesty, hard work, and fierce loyalty. Their grandchildren bore their names and their stubborn hearts. Their great-grandchildren, not yet born, would grow up hearing stories about the Eastern lady who came west with a fortune in her petticoat, and the mountain man who married her not for gold, but for the treasure of her determined spirit. In the end, that was the real fortune. Not the $6,000 Delilah had carried west in 1867, though that money had certainly helped establish their security. The real wealth was measured in 53 years of partnership, of facing challenges together and celebrating victories together, of building a family and community and legacy that would endure. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped, Xander helped Delilah inside where the fire burned warm and welcoming. They prepared for bed with the easy familiarity of a lifetime together, each knowing the other's needs and rhythms without words. And when they finally settled under the quilts Delilah had made and Xander had helped stitch, they lay close as they always had, drawing comfort from each other's presence. "I love you," Delilah whispered into the darkness. "Today, yesterday, tomorrow, always." "Always," Xander echoed, and held her close as they drifted into sleep, content in the knowledge that their stubborn hearts had found their perfect match in each other, and that was the greatest treasure anyone could ever hope to possess. Their story became legend in Idaho territory, passed down through generations as an example of what was possible when two people chose partnership over independence, trust over fear, and love over the easy gold that drew so many others. The cabin stood for another 100 years before being carefully preserved as a historical site, testament to the mountain man and the Eastern lady who built their lives on the foundation of mutual respect and fierce devotion.